Today, we're going to cover kind of some background on transportation electrification initiatives in Tennessee over the last few years, and then touch on some of the recent announcements and kind of funding opportunities that will be coming down the pike. And so without further ado, I think we'll jump right in. So what is Drive Electric Tennessee? Drive Electric Tennessee is an initiative that was kicked off by the Tennessee Valley Authority back in 2018. This was a multi-stakeholder initiative that brought together kind of key players interested in the transportation electrification conversation, including state agencies like TDEC and TDOT, universities, utilities, including TVA and local power companies, local governments, advocacy groups, nonprofits. We all came together to essentially come up with a shared vision and goal for electric vehicles in Tennessee. And so through that effort, we established a roadmap, which was published in early 2019. And that roadmap identified a goal of driving the electric vehicle population to 200,000 electric vehicles on the road by 2028. And just for context, where we are today, we track this on a quarterly basis through the Department of Revenue. We pull the active registrations and then we run them through a VIN decoder to get both the full battery electric vehicle population as well as the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle population. So as of June of this year, we've got about 20,000 electric vehicles on the road in Tennessee. So we've still got a way to go to get to that 200,000 goal by 2028. But through that road mapping initiative through Drive Electric Tennessee, we also came up with a list of 40 plus projects that we could be working on to help drive that EV adoption throughout the state in a number of kind of areas, whether it be supportive policies and programs, developing infrastructure, and driving education and awareness. So next slide. In addition to publishing that roadmap, TVA then kickstarted in 2019 a statewide electric vehicle charging infrastructure needs assessment. And so basically this was a way of taking stock and inventory of the existing charging infrastructure, publicly available charging infrastructure, looking at the state of operability of that charging infrastructure, and then thinking through what were the gaps that we needed to build out enough publicly available charging infrastructure that would meet a 200,000 EV population by 2028. So also as part of this exercise, we were thinking through different use cases for charging infrastructure, whether it be workplace charging, multifamily housing, dwelling charging, just public community charging, fast charging on corridors. And so we were thinking through all of these different use cases and trying to figure out where that infrastructure needed to be placed over the coming years to meet that demand. And so as a result of that statewide infrastructure needs assessment, we kind of came to the conclusion that there was a need for public or utility investment in fast charging infrastructure on corridors. And kind of the key reason for this was because this infrastructure is the most expensive from a cost perspective, but is also anticipated to have a fairly low utilization in the short term, just because 90% of charging occurs at home or at the place of residence. So these chargers would only be used by people who are taking road trips and might need to get from one place to another on that off occasion. They wouldn't be someone's kind of daily charging application. And so in early 2021, TDEC and TVA signed a memorandum of agreement to co-develop and co-fund what we were calling the Fast Charge TN network. And so we identified both primary and secondary corridors, primary corridors being the major interstates, and then secondary corridors being select US highways that we selected based on kind of average annual daily traffic, EMT stats, projected EV population growth over time. And then we also overlaid that with our economically distressed and at-risk counties, as well as the location of our state parks to see which corridors could kind of run through those and help bring an economic development to those regions. And so the Fast Charge TN network, essentially we're leveraging two different funding sources for this. On TDEC's side, we're leveraging the Volkswagen Settlement Environmental Mitigation Trust funds. We've allocated $5.2 million towards that. And then TVA is bringing additional funding to the table. So just, I think 2 weeks ago, we actually just announced who the local power companies are who will be receiving these funds to develop these fast charging stations throughout the state. And so as part of the Fast Charge TN network, we're developing approximately 40 sites on these corridors. Another initiative that I'll just mention quickly is we partnered with the automotive manufacturer Rivian. They make this all-electric R1T truck. And so Rivian is actually donating level 2 chargers and installing them at all 56 of our state parks in Tennessee at no cost to the state. And they'll also be operating and maintaining those for a period of 10 years. And so we're really excited. We have 3 parks that are online now, and I think we have about 26 that should be online by the end of September. And so we're working through the installation of those day by day. Another thing is the element of education and awareness is really key in terms of driving the electric vehicle conversation. And so we're lucky to have kind of a pretty robust ecosystem at this point of partners that are helping us in this space. The Drive Electric Tennessee initiative that I mentioned earlier is now an initiative that's managed by a nonprofit based out of UT called the East Tennessee Clean Fuels Coalition. And so they're doing a ton of work in the education and awareness space to drive consumer awareness. And then we've got 2 different U.S. Department of Energy Clean Cities coalitions that also work as kind of technical assistance providers to consumers, local governments, fleets, both public and private, that are looking to transition to electric vehicles. And now I'm going to hand it off to Matt, and he's going to kind of talk about what's coming next.
So then came the new Infrastructure Act, the IIJA or BIL. I'm sure most of you have heard that. But part of that introduced a program called the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Deployment Plan. This was made specifically to help put in, to provide money for electric vehicle chargers across the designated corridors. I'm not going to read this, but I've identified what the plan actually is and what the plan's mission is, but it's really to help jumpstart some of these companies and putting chargers into the ground and making sure that this range anxiety, or if you want to look at it a more positive spin, range confidence is alleviated. So some of the goals obviously are to like I said, to alleviate some of that anxiety or bring in that confidence. We want to make sure that these will not fall into ill repair. So we have maintenance plans that we want to put together. We want to make sure that future vehicles that are created can use these sites to make sure that we future-proof them, and some cybersecurity risks too. We understand that there are bad people out there who want to do things that disrupt some new technology, and we have to make sure we do that. As far as funding goes, for Tennessee, we are going to receive about $88.3 million of about a $4.2 billion funding pot for the next 5 years. These funds are used primarily on for the first round, they have to be used on the designated corridors. And for that in Tennessee, those are the double-digit interstates, except for I-55 in Memphis, plus the US 64 that connects Memphis to Chattanooga. So those are where the funds have to be used first and foremost. If we have any available funds after we achieve build-out, which I will describe here in a second, we may be able to expand that to other areas, but they have to be utilized on public accessible land 24/7. They may or may not have the same restrictions as the alternative fuel corridors that we'll talk about. The requirements that are set forth in this, you must have this combined charging system type 1 plug. This is more of a new technology that has come around. Tesla does not have this plug type at this moment, but there are adapters that they're introducing to help provide that. Spacing requirements, like I talked about, along this designated corridor, they have to be at most 50 miles apart from each other, and they can be no more than 1 mile from that designated corridor. So in order to achieve that and be eligible for these funds, those spacing requirements have to happen. If you do the math, I guess if we go back a little bit, the eligible corridors right now are approximately 1,500 miles in distance. So if you take a 50-mile spacing, that's about 30 charging stations that you'll need to achieve build out across the state on these corridors. Roughly, you have, I think the latest cost estimates are about $1.5 million per site. So there should be enough left over to expand beyond that. But again, we don't know all that yet, and with inflation, costs could be going up a little bit higher. Last thing about the requirements have to do with the power requirement. You have to have, at minimum, 4 charging stations at each location. Each of those individual stations have to be able to pull 150 kilowatts simultaneously. So the demand for these locations is 60 kilowatts per location. You can have more, but the minimum is 4 stations. I mean, 4 stations per location. There are some areas that where the local power companies may not be able to do that, and I think that's where our cost could increase a little bit more to help beef that up. So throughout the month of May, we had a pretty robust public engagement party, I guess you could say. We were given 6 months to put this plan together. It came out in February. It was due August 1st. So we had a lot of internal work that needed to be done, and really couldn't do a lot of external work because of the schedule. But we were able to spend the month of May to get out to 9 sites across the state. We did 3 in each of the Grand Divisions. The closest one to here was in Knoxville. I believe it was somewhere in the teens of May, and I don't know if anybody was able to attend that at any point, but we had a pretty good turnout. We also had a big social media blitz. We had a website that is still active today. If anybody's interested, you can go to tn.gov/evplan to see all the materials that were created. There is a webinar that we put, a recorded session that we put together to kind of mimic a public meeting. We also had a pretty robust survey that went out. We received within that month over 1,000 responses. 88 counties were covered in that survey, and 274 zip codes. Most of the responses we got, 53% of those responses, I know you can't read that, but 53% were obtained in Knoxville, Memphis, and Davidson counties. I'm sorry, Shelby County. I just realized that there's a typo there. Knox, Shelby, and Davidson County. Some of the things that we heard as far as the responses were, what are the criteria for a location? Volume was one of those. Points of interest or destinations, and specific amenities. These DC fast chargers, which have that combined system, take about roughly 20 minutes to get to a, 80% charge? So there are instances where if you want to charge, you may have an opportunity to go out and visit the area that you're in right now, like a Buc-ee's or potentially a Buc-ee's. But those are the 3 criteria. Future ideas had to do with making sure that we had additional chargers in case the demand was great. Like I mentioned before, the local power companies' coordination and infrastructure, we had to make sure we want to future-proof those. I talked a little bit about future-proofing the vehicle types. So as you know, most of the vehicles that are out there now are car type, but as Ford comes around with their Lightning and Rivian, they're going to want to start towing things. And with these chargers right now, a lot of them are pull in, curb, and back out, and that's probably not what's going to be feasible with those types of people that are trailing. So we want to make sure that we future-proof for these heavier duty trucks. And also, as technology increases, 600 kilowatts may not be the standard anymore. So we want to make sure that we have enough ability to maybe up the power when needed moving forward. So that's what we've heard from the public engagement. We really wanted to make sure that this was the plan for the people. We had a lot of other states who did the opposite route, where they did the plan and then sent the plan out for public comment, but we actually did the opposite, where we wanted your feedback before we finished the plan, and that took us a little bit longer to get it to the joint office for submittal. But we still have a long way to go. What we just did was basically turn in a report that unlocks those $88 million of funds. It's not to the point where we have specified specific locations. We don't know exactly where that is. We don't know exactly who we're going to be contracting with. We're spending this time between August and September 30th when the feds are supposed to give us the approved document to work on standards, making sure that we know how to prioritize locations. If we have multiple sites competing for within that 50-mile radius, we want to make sure that we're using the most efficient and the best bang for those dollars to do that. So, we have a lot, again, challenges and risk. I know folks in the back can't really read that, but I believe that these slides will be available if you want to look at that. But again, we have a lot of work to go. Our timeline for that, as I said, August 1st is when we submitted that plan. We actually submitted it a couple days early. The Federal Highway has until September 30th to provide us comments or approve the plan, which will unlock those funds, like I said, the first 2 years of those funds. What we're going to do in the meantime is to start working on how we're going to procure these funds, how we're going to get them out for implementation, develop these standards that we talk about, making sure that we've covered all of our bases that meets the goals and those associated risks. And then hopefully, if everything goes right, by June of next year, end of the second quarter, we should be able to start releasing and awarding contracts out to these people. So you'll start seeing some of these stations go up across the state. One thing that they also introduced, is anybody familiar with Justice 40? Has anybody heard of that term up to this point? So this is another initiative by the federal government when it comes to climate resilience and making sure that we are cognizant of our investments. But Justice 40 is 40% of the overall investments with federal funds need to benefit disadvantaged and at-risk communities. So this TEVI plan that we're putting together as we implement has to be reported in somehow. And it's still kind of up in the air how we're doing that. We don't know exactly how the reporting goes because this is a fairly new initiative. But it doesn't mean necessarily that a station has to be located in these shaded areas that you can see here. It just means that it has to benefit somebody who's either from that area, who will utilize these charging stations, or it could be the physical location. But I wanted to bring that up because you'll probably hear this a lot more in the future because it's going to be something that most federal funding will require when it comes to the climate side of things. So I'm going to hand it back over to Alexa and she's going to talk a little bit about the collaboration that we've done.
Yeah, just one more slide here just to show that we've also been coordinating with our neighbors across the border of our states because Tennessee touches a lot of other neighboring states. And so as we're building out corridor infrastructure in particular, we want to make sure that we're not installing infrastructure right at the border and then having a duplicative charging station right on the other side. So we formed a group called the Southeast Regional Electric Vehicle Information Exchange. And we meet monthly, and essentially it's all of our counterparts from the state energy offices and the DOTs in each state, and also Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands. And so we meet and kind of discuss our plans and also best practices that we can learn from each other as we're building out infrastructure. We've also built out this mapping tool, the Southeast Revy mapping tool, which is publicly accessible for anyone. And so it includes a variety of layers that we can toggle on and off as we're considering locations for infrastructure development, including existing stations, planned stations, but then also things like air quality measurements, proportion of population that speaks English as a second language, low-income populations, different things like that. So we can kind of toggle different things on and off as we're looking at locating infrastructure in different sites. And I think that's all we had for the presentation, but happy to answer any questions that you guys have.
Yeah. I think we have another hour or two before it's time for you all to go. I know it's not the last. No.
I don't know whoever wants to go first. So the first question is, your plan is to, by 2028, to adopt 200,000, to have 200,000 EVs on the road. So what is the state doing to overcome the stigma of electric vehicles? Because if you look on Facebook, the #1 post out there is they're asking me to unplug or turn off my air conditioner or turn it up, but they want us to buy electric vehicles. And is the state's electrical grid and infrastructure prepared to handle 200,000 new vehicles on the road that are all electric? Because you guys have a huge stigma to overcome, because I'm telling you, it's out on Facebook. If they're telling us to turn our air conditioners up because the grid can't handle a simple home with air conditioning, how does it want to handle charging those vehicles on top of it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So TVA's been doing a lot of work on this, and in many ways, they're some of the biggest advocates of this because for a while they were seeing kind of their projected load growth as being flat, if not declining. So for them, this is a new way of selling electricity, generating electricity. They've done, as part of their IRP process, where they plan out 10 years in advance in terms of generation needs and transmission needs. This was something they've been looking at for years now in terms of just modeling and what would the impact be to the electric grid. So interestingly, TVA found that if every single electric vehicle in the entire Tennessee Valley region, which is parts of 7 states, not just Tennessee, if every vehicle was electrified overnight, the impact to the grid would be less than the impact was when everyone adopted air conditioning after World War II. And so they've modeled that, and obviously we don't expect that every vehicle is going to transition overnight. It's going to be a phased approach. And so they're working hand in hand with the local power companies who are really going to see it on the distribution side. And really, from the distribution side, that's where we'll see the biggest impact. But the nice thing is that these funds are helping to cover those electrical upgrade costs that are costly in order to provide that capacity at the distribution side. From your question on kind of people turning off their air conditioning or whatever, a lot of the electric vehicles are great grid resources because you can kind of time them for when they're being charged with time of use rates. And then you can actually, like with the F-150 Lightning, you can use it as backup power for your house where you actually have bidirectional charging. And so essentially, it's a grid resource in that sense.
No, and I agree with you 100%. I'm 100% for electric vehicles. I'm just saying there's a stigma out there, and what is the state going to do to combat that, to achieve that goal?
Definitely. So that's the whole education outreach component. So we've been doing, it's a lot of, we've been doing a ton of ride and drives throughout the state where we try and dispel myths, get people butts in seats essentially, and we just talk to people, answer their questions. We have a ton of social media campaigns. We've been doing like radio, TV, like all these different types of outreach initiatives. I agree, there's a lot of myths to dispel and people to kind of answer their questions, but yeah. So
that's a big goal, 200,000 vehicles. And a bad stigma out there already. Just, I talk to people about it, trying to come up with support, and it's not, I've never seen it. So, well, you're going to do this right.
So go ahead.
This may be for Matt, but I-69, extension of I-69 that affects, the entire West Tennessee region, anything from Fort Ford or Forsyth being given to EV infrastructure on any I-69 extension?
Yeah, there's definitely, Alexa talked about, so the Fast Charge TN network and the NEVI, or the TEVI network, I guess you could see TEVI as being a subset of the Fast Charge TN network. And because of the restrictions on TEVI only being on designated corridors, we have to do those first. We have to hit build out with those. But we can expand those out if there are funds available to get into these, the future I-69 to make sure that area, once it's become fully, established as an interstate, to become another route that can be used moving forward. The Fast Charge TN funds to also do that too, but those restrictions are a little less on the Fast Charge TN than what the TEVI restrictions are.
The other thing too is that, so the corridors that are designated under NEVI, that was a process where we had to nominate those corridors and FHWA designated them. They've contemplated future rounds of nominations, so to the extent that in later years we feel that another corridor needs to be designated by FHWA, they'll put out a call for nominations and we could propose another corridor. We also know that they're going to be coming out with freight corridor designations soon for all fuel freight corridors. So that will be a whole other kind of category of corridor to build out with infrastructure.
Could you put that back up where we saw the main highways?
But you want the shields? I was going to show you. Okay.
I wanted the shields.
Sorry.
I was thinking shields. You might be right.
Yeah. So the eligible routes currently are, again, all the double-digit interstates plus US 64. Right. Omitting 55. But back to your question. The last round of requests to nominate more routes for the designated corridors, we wanted to make sure that it gave us enough flexibility to go beyond these corridors and figure out what's the best phase 2, I guess you could call it, for these funds moving forward.
And I think you said you didn't want to have them too close to state lines where they may be doing the same thing in Arkansas and Mississippi, where we're in the Memphis area. That may limit how many we get on our side because they may have one just over the state line.
Yeah, well, we'll look at that, and I think if especially for a place like Memphis where there's a higher demand for EVs and we see a bigger population, I think we would see corridor build out. I know MLGW is one of the recipients under Fast Charge TN, and just under that program, they're going to be developing 2 different fast charging sites.
Because I only saw one red dot.
Yeah.
The only Tesla.
So the red dots are state park locations.
Oh,
That's what that is. But yeah, these were just the corridor. This just shows the corridors of focus under Fast Charge TN. It doesn't. But yeah, so MLGW, they'll be receiving funding to do 2 different locations under Fast Charge TN.
Mayor Moore, go ahead.
I was curious about paying for the electricity if I charge my electric vehicle. Have we had any foresight as far as what that's gonna look like?
As far as the charging rates?
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, go ahead, Lisa.
Sure, yeah. So we've seen there are a number of key players that are kind of already building out in many ways like the first gen or first phase of what these will look like. So you may have seen Electrify America stations out there. We've probably got about 11 of them in Tennessee at this point. And so these stations have usually about 8 different chargers per site, and they have both plug types available so any vehicle can use them. And we see typically at those sites that they're charging about 30 to 36 cents per kilowatt hour, essentially. Sometimes it's slightly different. TVA, so interestingly, a few years ago, for DC fast charging stations, a lot of the owners were getting hit with demand charges because there was a lot of power being requested very quickly that couldn't be anticipated. And so Electrify America told TVA that that was cost prohibitive and was making it not economically feasible to own and operate a charging station. So TVA heard that and they developed a special commercial rate for DC fast chargers specifically. That's just a wholesale energy rate and it removes the demand charge. And so that will kind of encourage future investment in DC fast charging. They also created a special policy that allows you to now charge by the kilowatt hour instead of by minute or by session, which previously was prohibited just based on some ways in which the TVA Act is written. But they created an exception so that you can now charge by the kilowatt hour. So it's a little bit more of a good like weights and measures, consistent approach because not all vehicles accept electricity at the same rate. So those are 2 policies that TVA made to kind of help prime the pump for some of the investment in these stations. But the 30-ish cents per kilowatt hour that we're seeing at public DC fast charging stations, you are paying in some ways a premium. You know, that's more than what you would pay at your house if you were to charge with 11 cents residential electricity, which is a really good deal. And that's where most people see their savings, which is why we see 90% of charging happening at home. But the 30-ish cents per kilowatt hour is still cost comparable to what you would pay for gasoline pre kind of all the price hikes we've been seeing originally. So it's very equivalent in terms of kind of the cost that you're paying for public charging.
Gentleman in the back. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. I've heard, well, first off, let me ask this question. How many cars do we have on the roads in Tennessee right now? That's come, you know, you're talking about 200,000 electric vehicles. I was just wanting to know what we have on the road right now.
We have 20,000, a little over 20,000 registered as of June 2022.
Okay. 20,000, no, not the electric. How many total?
Oh, total. I think it's like
vehicles?
6 something million.
Okay.
Six.
200,000.
Yeah.
My second question is my understanding, and you guys are the ones to answer. My understanding, people are telling me that the electric vehicle is 3,000 to 5,000 pounds more per vehicle on the road. And right now, we pay our road repairs and whatnot, gas tax. If we get electric vehicles, which is great. Are we thinking ahead about the gas tax type thing that we're not gonna have anymore for our cities and counties to pave roads?
Yes, sir. Electric vehicles, as of today, are charged $100 for tag registration. If you do some back of the math calculations on what that's equivalent to as far as gas tax, that's roughly somewhere around 12,000 miles of travel based on the gas tax that you pay for every fill up. To get you, it's just, you can assume about maybe $4 in gas tax to get you to $100. It's around 1,200 or 12,000 miles.
That sounds good. Thirdly, in my area, I live in Millington, which is north of Memphis. We use MLG&W. MLG&W, my understanding is about $1 billion of infrastructure that they need to spend right now, today, to bring their that utility up to date. And this is going to be extra on their infrastructure. Is that been thought about at all? Because as the gentleman's up there talking about turning our air conditioners off or bringing them down right now, we elected officials, people are gonna be screaming and hollering at us when we have blackouts and brownouts for long periods of time.
Yeah, so I'll say that the fast charge TAN grants that MLGW is receiving, for instance, and then also future NEVI grants, they can cover costs of associated electrical upgrades. So it's not just the cost of the charging infrastructure. Everything that's associated with bringing the electrical up to capacity is an eligible reimbursable cost, so that would be part of the grant that they would be receiving.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Over here, I think.
Yeah, just looking forward to the future when this is really catching on and it's where we want it to be. Who, I guess, is there legislation at the state level, or will there be legislation that deals with who can own and operate a charging station? Is that going to be only private? Is it going to be government? What's your thoughts?
Well, I believe TDOT's stance at this moment is they do not want to be owners and operators of this infrastructure. Right now, we are here to help jumpstart that and let private industry take that over, because that will be where most of the advancement is at that point. So
We see both public and private ownership. I mean,
Right.
there are many examples of local governments that own and operate charging stations. The city of Nashville has a pretty large network at this point. I know the city of Knoxville is getting into that space as well. So we definitely see public entities getting into that space. The local power companies, which are in many cases municipally owned, or co-ops, are owning charging stations. And they're in the business of selling electricity, so they have a stake in that as well. And then we're seeing private entities, as demand and adoption grows, we'll see more and more private investment, I think.
one thing, I don't know if anybody's familiar or aware of this, but rest areas are not eligible for NEVI because you can't install anything that is a revenue charger. So we've always thought that rest areas would be a great place to put them, but that federally are not eligible for that. So I just wanted to throw that to you.
Is that a law that could be amended?
It'd be a federal law that would have to be amended. I know New York actually has some
New York was
provisions on that.
grandfathered in,
Right.
something about the way in which they're,
Because they're an authority.
yeah.
But everybody else, federal rest areas are not eligible. Parks, state parks?
Yes, state parks are already identified.
Well, yeah, Rivian has helped us with that.
Yeah, parks are fine, yeah. It's more the federal right of way that is prohibited.
But again, right, and the location again, state parks have to be within that 50-mile, 1 mile requirement from those corridors in order to
say
get
us, Rivian helped us with the state park. Are we in talks with other manufacturers about other places? I know one of the manufacturers builds here in the state.
Tritium, yeah, so there's an Australian company, Tritium, that will be building chargers in Lebanon. And so, yeah, we've had conversations with them about potentially being a vendor under this. Obviously, all the vendors that will be selected have to be kind of competitively
Blue Oval is coming
procured.
to the Memphis Shelby County.
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah.
We're talking to them.
Oh, we're definitely talking to all the automakers. Those are the vehicle makers, and they're all a part of the supportive ecosystem that's trying to drive this conversation. I mean, Tennessee, we have a goal of being the #1 state in the country to manufacture electric vehicles. And so with Blue Opal, we'll be there because we already have Volkswagen, GM, and Nissan
Yeah, like we're doing it.
in Spring Hill.
That's what
Ma'am, you had a question?
Yes, when you talk about the $100 registration fee and that we pay for road stuff, is that all federal money or will part of that become state tax money also?
The $100 is a state imposed tax on the electric vehicle, on the registration of it.
So that would all go to the states, that would be federal? Isn't there a federal gas tax also?
That's, well, what the equivalent is the state tax, the 100 to the state tax equivalent, the gas equivalent. Yeah, the federal money goes back to the general fund and is divvied up in other ways, and the part of that I would say is helping pay for these NEVI funds at that point. Now I do want to say too that part of the Infrastructure Act, the new Infrastructure Act, is to look at pilot programs that try to equate some of the user fees that are associated with transportation. So the $100 may not be what was used moving forward, but studies will help us provide what is a better way of creating a revenue that helps for the wear and tear of these vehicles. And as technology improves, the batteries will become lighter too. So you have to keep that in mind, that this may not always be the case, that electric vehicles are heavier than internal combustion engines. Yes, sir.
So there's a lot of information out there about how long the batteries in these electric vehicles will be good for, and a lot of people, based on the estimate, like to keep their cars longer than that. And so if it had to be replaced, how expensive is it going to be to replace the battery system?
Yeah, it's a great question. And a lot of these manufacturers now, it's pretty common to have like an 8 to 10 year warranty on the battery, or 200,000 miles, whichever you reach first. I think a lot of the ones that we're seeing, it's still first gen, so we haven't yet necessarily gotten to the point at which the batteries need to be replaced. So I don't even quite know if a market for that is fully fleshed out in that regard. But also, I would say that battery recycling and second life battery applications are two really hot topics right now. So I know we're in talks with Tennessee Tech to do some deployments of like used Nissan Leaf batteries and putting them into a second life application as storage for solar assisted charging stations that could be mobile and moved around, like in the case of an emergency. So we're trying to be thinking of different creative ways to use the batteries further, give them additional life, even if they can't be used as a vehicle battery at a certain point. And then battery recycling, there's a ton of players in this space that are working on developing battery recycling so that it's more efficient and cost effective. And I know the automakers are all very interested in that as well. So.
That was my next question. What is the status plan on recycling of batteries?
I was just curious what, being the cost of an electric vehicle is somewhat higher than a combustion engine. Are there programs that maybe would be designed at actually, making it affordable to buy that?
I know the Inflation Reduction Act that just passed last week has expanded electric vehicle tax credits, including tax credits for the first time on used EVs. So that brings down the price even further for used EVs. But I know that a lot of the there's like 30 plus models out there that you can now buy of EVs, and many of them with the $7,500 tax credit are like $20,000 new. And so they're it's still a new vehicle, and so not everyone can afford that, but the price has gone down significantly in the last 5 years for many of these vehicles.
Thinking about electrical vehicles and the batteries, are the batteries recyclable, or what are they gonna do with the batteries that they take out? Where are they gonna put them? Where are they gonna discard them?
Yeah, so that's what I was just mentioning. There's a lot of players in this space, and a lot of the automakers are kind of leading the charge on this as well, because they have an interest in seeing a strong battery recycling market flourish, because we have limited certain critical minerals. There's also a ton of work that's being done to reduce the amount of critical minerals that are required in batteries, and so I know that that's another kind of parallel initiative as well.
Right now.
Now is the time to invest in battery recycling. But go look up your stocks.
Any other questions?
I'll ask one since nobody's answering. My neighbor's an electrician, and he just hates this whole idea. I asked him about hooking mine up at my house, get a charger, hooking it up, he won't do it. He says, that if our little city, 50% of us get the car, it'll crash our grid.
Yeah, so that's what I was speaking about, the distribution system upgrades.
So is that true? He says 20%?
But the goal that they're have is in 3%.
3%. I don't think it'll be at that point in 20 years.
Right, it'll be a phased adoption, yeah.
Again,
That's the statement that the state really needs to back, because that's the biggest
That's
thing
the
out
biggest
there.
one. Yeah.
They don't really fully understand it. How can we educate the public on this and what it means?
Yeah.
And this is the real matter because we're TML person. How much is it gonna cost us?
It depends if you want to own a station or not.
No, I mean the city. No, we don't wanna own it. No. We don't wanna own it because that's too much liability. But we'll have to provide the infrastructure and support the charging stations.
Well, it depends. Again, whoever the applicant wants to work with. It could be, current gas station owners who decided that they want
Wherever they put
to
it.
pivot, correct.
Why is there too much loaders?
Well, something go wrong. You ever heard of anything going wrong with that?
Yeah, fire.
Power stations, there's always something going wrong.
Uh-oh. Questions are back. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Jason with EOS Link. We're actually an EV charging company based in Brentwood. Was kind of curious if you'll talk a little bit about the question we got a lot this week was obviously when you guys, your concerns about the power, which you touched on, but a little bit of history on that $100. When was that implemented? Has there been, if you think you know, and is there any talks to increase that and any tax revenue potentially on the charging side that's the energy that's been talked
Yeah,
about?
those are the things that we have not uncovered yet. I mean, again, the pilot could help us with that, but as we work through the procurement process, while we wait for these plans to become official and adopted, we have, again, a lot of work to do to make that happen.
Do you know when the $100, when that started?
I don't.
I think it was part of the Improve Act, so
Okay.
when TDOT was increasing the gas tax, it was part of that big package.
Got
And
it,
so it was
okay.
essentially folded into that at that time.
Yeah, and that's only for pure electric vehicles too.
Right.
Hybrids do not receive that $100 charge at all.
Even
Plug-in
plug-in
hybrid,
hybrids?
correct.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you.